Hello and welcome to the Newsagent podcast. My name is Victoria Brush. I'm a Senior Content Executive for Goodlord. This is a recording of our webinar, Where do letting agents and landlords stand in the run-up to the general election? In this podcast, we'll hear from William Reeve, Chris Norris and Ben Stokes as they discuss the upcoming general election, what policies will influence how letting agents and landlords plan to vote, and what policies may benefit or harm the private rental sector. And now, onto the podcast.
Morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm William Reeve, CEO of Goodlord. I'm very pleased to kick off this morning's webinar, jointly hosted here with Chris Norris and Ben Stokes, who I'll introduce in just a moment. It's less than 6 weeks to go in the run-up to the UK's next general election, and here we are to discuss where letting agents and landlords stand in the run-up to that general election. Very pleased to have my two co-hosts on the webinar today. Chris Norris is Policy and Campaigns Director of NRLA. Welcome, Chris.
Morning, William.
Do you want to just give us a quick introduction to your role, Chris, at the NRLA?
Sorry, of course, that was me trying to work out if I had unmuted myself and getting hopefully the IT issue out of the way.
Yep, all good.
So yes, I'm Policy Director with the NRLA. I hope you're all fairly familiar with what we are. We're an organisation that pretty much does what we said on the tin, I suppose. We're a membership body for private residential landlords. Got about 110,000 members or so in membership today, and my role really is government engagement. It's media and public relations, and it's our campaigning work. So when you see the NRLA commenting on some of these issues we'll be talking about today, that's my team in the organisation.
Super, welcome. Really pleased to have you along today. And then we have Ben Stokes. Welcome, Ben. Ben's an Associate Lettings Director at JNP.
Good morning.
Morning. And tell us a little bit about what you do at JNP, Ben.
And so I'm Associate Lettings Director, so I'm very hands-on on the front line, overseeing the lettings operation for the business, predominantly more on the front line side of things now, having historically looked after some property management and so kind of all aspects of the business really. So I'm very much in the thick of it on the day-to-day basis, and currently about to go to the members' vote for the ALA Vice President as well.
Very good. So it's voting all around then, Ben, from the sound of things. And
next week, yes, please.
Yeah, excellent. And just to say a few words about Goodlord, those of you who are not familiar with Goodlord, Goodlord is the best way to progress lettings deals remotely. It's a software platform, but with over 300 people based all over the country. We assist with everything from referencing through to rent protection insurance, all the way through to handling the lettings accounts and supporting tenants with bills included offers and everything in the middle of that process. Hopefully, most people on the call will be familiar with this. If you're not, obviously, please do feel free to get in touch afterwards. Just to kick off this morning's webinar, we have a good agenda for you all this morning. We're looking at where do letting agents and landlords stand in the run-up to the general election. We've got some pretty hot off the press research to share here, jointly conducted with Goodlord and the NRLA, and that looks at the current sentiment among landlords and letting agents. It examines which policies will influence their voting in the election, what they think about some of the policies that have been going through the Houses of Parliament recently, which of course now very much back up in the air with the general election called faster than expected. And we'll finish with how letting agents can prepare for more legislative change, especially if with the prospect of, as polls suggest, a change of government coming up in the summer. There are Q&A facilities on this webinar. Do feel free to throw questions at us on the Q&A button. You should find it, if you're on a desktop, there's a horizontal panel for most of us at the bottom of the screen with Q&A on it, but you can do it on the mobile as well, and very much look forward to taking questions as we go. But let's start off with the run-up to the general election, and we've got a slide here with some of the recent sort of results from the local elections earlier in May. The national polling, these figures in the middle is from the BBC, and in fact, hot off the press this morning from Property Industry Eye, the poll taken by them of their readers, which are lettings professionals across the sector, just about 700 people on their poll, and you can see here pretty clearly that Labour had a very good local election In fact, the Lib Dems had a good local election too, pushing the Conservatives into third place. But at national level, Labour is very much polling in the lead here to win the general election. Conservatives being pushed into second place, but in fact, Reform showing up in the third place. New party, the successor to the UKIP party from the last couple of elections. But in our industry, it's a more conservative following industry. The Conservatives remain in number one place, as shown in this morning's Property Industry Eye story. Ben, does this picture tell the story you're familiar with on the ground?
Yeah, I think so. I think it very much is what we're hearing in general, that I think it's looking likely it's going to be a change of government to a Labour government. But I would also say that with the colleagues and people that I've worked with in the industry, it very much points towards a more conservative lent industry. Most definitely from my experience within the kind of frontline activity.
What's driving that, do you think, Ben?
I think there's a nervousness over a potential Labour government in that it potentially being even more tenant favoured, and with landlords, the feeling on the ground is that they're being attacked from all angles. And I think especially those older school landlords that have been in this industry for a long time, they almost feel like every way they turn, there's something else negative against them. And my job as an agent is to try and still point out the positives, but we are very much seeing that although I think a lot of people are very much on the fence and are not very happy with the way things have gone over the last few years under the current government, I think there is that nervousness about, if we go down that Labour route, what additional change will there be not in the landlord's favour? Yeah,
interesting. And we weren't really expecting the general election to be quite as early as July, were we, Chris? What do you think the impact of that's going to have here?
We weren't, and I think it's going to be a challenge for Ben to carry on being so optimistic, to be honest, and pointing out the bright side, because certainly the landlords that I talk to at the NRLA, it's not so much that they're polarised between Conservative and Labour. I think they feel completely politically homeless at the moment. They don't know where to turn. When I've been in this job long enough to remember when we switched from Labour to Conservative or to coalition last time around. And I remember then being very cautious with our members who were quite upbeat about the prospect of a Conservative government. And I think if they could look back over the last 14 years, they might not have been quite so upbeat about what was coming. The early election, I mean, the biggest impact, and we'll get onto this, I don't want to scare the horses, is obviously the bill, because the bill is no more. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a minute. But also it means that housing is going, or rented housing at least, is going to be more of a political football over the next 6 weeks. I think had this been in November and maybe the leasehold bill had turned out a little bit differently to how it did, and the rented reform bill had managed to progress into law, they might have been on the back burner. And actually we could have looked at other issues. I think now, certainly this whole ending Section 21, no ifs, no buts, no maybes from Labour is going to be there. And I wouldn't want to put a bet on what the Conservative Party have got to say about rented housing right now, because I think they are so completely split about what could be in their manifesto. So, the next 3 weeks or so before we see those manifestos is going to be fascinating.
And Chris, just for the audience here, just if you wouldn't mind just quickly summarising, what is the story with the rental reform bill? It was in the second reading of the House of Lords, and of course, there's been some news even since the slides were prepared about the leasehold bill. And maybe you just summarise that for our audience.
I mean, there was a lot of back and forth. So what tends to happen, without getting too geeky about this and going back to my very old now politics degree, when an election's called, you've got a period before you prorogate Parliament, before you essentially pause everything, and then you've got a period before you dissolve Parliament. We're in that second period at the moment. What happens between calling the election and proroguing Parliament is you go through a process called wash-up. And essentially, the two major parties, or if you've got a more split Parliament, the crossbenchers and the backbenchers all get together and they say, we can live with that bill if you do X, or we're quite happy with that bill. We can just nod that through and go straight to royal assent. You normally have a week or so of that. So you've got plenty of time to get everything through. What happened this week, and in fact, we were in Parliament when we were launching this report, when all of the speculation mounted. What happened was Rishi Sunak called the election and he did two quite strange things. He said we'll go for a long campaign because he only needs to call a 3-week campaign. He's decided to do a 6-week campaign, and I wouldn't want to guess why he's done that. And that meant that they had to dissolve Parliament very early. And what I was thinking on Wednesday afternoon was they'll call the election, they'll cancel recess, because Parliament is currently in recess this week. They'll get all the wash-up done, and that'll mean this will all be fine. They decided to keep recess, which meant they only had 2 days of wash-up. And I think there were 16 bills that needed to be discussed. The long and the short of it is the leasehold and the leasehold and freehold reform bill did get through, but it was watered down. So they thought there would be an abolition of ground rents. There wasn't. There have been some other tweaks in there. I can't pretend to be very expert in that, but in that what is now ACT, but that was pushed through. Renters reform, despite an awful lot of horse trading behind the scenes, and I can tell you it wasn't a done deal as early as some organisations were reporting. It was a done deal. Didn't get the time. So my understanding is actually both the Conservatives and Labour were happy for that bill to go ahead, but an agreement couldn't be reached on exactly what form or with enough of the crossbenchers in the House of Lords. So that bill has fallen. It means it is no more. It can't be progressed any further. It can't come back after the election unless whichever party forms the next government decides to bring back exactly the same bill, which they won't. So, frankly, all of the last few years of work trying to get to a position of compromise with that bill is done. And I can tell you that makes me consider some of my life choices over the last couple of years, I must say.
Yeah, well, but at the same time, what the bill was trying to do was push forward and reform on various aspects, and those aspects actually are not going away, and that's what we're going to be exploring in the rest of this webinar. But let's have a look at the research we've done here. Thank you very much for that summary, Chris. It's really helpful. But the research that we've presented last week. If I can just jump on a slide, please. This is the second part of the Goodlord's Renting Done Right report, but it's the first part that we've worked with the NRLA on. That we presented it, in fact, last week at the House of Lords, literally, as Chris said, while the press conference was being called about the general election. And the research draws on a survey conducted of over 1,000 landlords and professional letting agents across the country. So it really gives you a sense, I suppose, from, if you like, the supply and professional side of the industry about the various issues that we touch on, and we'll draw out some of the highlights of that in the next few slides and minutes. We've got a little bit of a photo pic on the next slide. We were very fortunate to have so good attendance at the session. We had a number of the peers involved with scrutinising the bill in the room, including the Shadow Housing Minister, Baroness Taylor, and we were very, very pleased to see sort of high level of engagement. And so, as Chris said, it's a shame that the momentum going on there is now sort of suspended for the general election, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what happens next. But as I say, there are a lot of themes here that we can pick out. So just, I suppose, let's kick off with what's the sentiment here? What's the sort of mindset in the industry? And first chart here just looks at the letting agent sentiment. So the question here is, over the next 12 months, how confident are agents about the prospects for their own agency in the next 12 months? And you can see here that about half of agents are either quite confident or very confident. Quarter of them about neither confident nor unconfident, but a quarter of them somewhat feeling not at all confident or not very confident. Ben, which side of this chart is your agency on, do you think?
I think I'm probably on the very confident. We are still seeing activity within the market. We're seeing, from a landlord's perspective, we're seeing lots of positives with rents being achieved still very good. We're not seeing great void periods. We're still keeping those to an absolute minimum. So very much, I'm still very, very positive about the outlook. I feel like, whilst I'm very pro a lot of what I think the renters reform would have brought, I think that this will always be kind of business as usual now for a lot of landlords, which will hopefully stop some of those landlords talking about exiting. So yeah, I think very positive. There's always going to be those negatives around tax and things, which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly. But yeah, I'm very positive. We'll definitely see a slight change in the market, but I don't see that there's any huge negative for us. We'll be a relatively big player in the towns that we trade in. But yeah, I'm definitely with the 51%.
Yeah, very good. And then in terms of what they thought of the bill, and to say the bill's now suspended, stroke kiboshed, but some of the issues in it, I think, we're very much expecting to reappear in whichever government wins the next election. Let's turn to what the views about letting agents were on that. There was decidedly mixed views, actually, on some of the key components of the bill. Let's have a look at the next slide, please. We get the introduction of periodic tenancies, so mandating periodic tenancies. This is the end of the assured short-hold tenancy, fixed-term tenancies in England and Wales. That was seen by 47% of agents as harmful. There are real concerns over the abolishing Section 21, so the no-fault evictions. Even though, as Chris alluded to, there's been sort of cross-party sort of support for that, and that was effectively in the Conservative manifesto. But nonetheless, there's real concerns about how that's going to be implemented, what the impact will be, and a more positive perspective on mandating membership of an ombudsman scheme, a property portal for registration of landlords, the right to have pets, and provided that the insurance is for damage caused by the pets is paid for, and introducing a decent home standard. Any surprises for you there, Ben?
I don't think there's any surprise in that. And one of the things that personally, the periodic tenancies, I don't actually see, as long as we've got that initial fixed term that we talked about, I think actually that was quite an easy one to overcome, being on the front line talking to landlords, is because actually whilst you can have a fixed term tenancy in place, the reality is if your tenant loses their job or they can't pay the rent, you normally look to break the contract anyway. So actually for me, as long as there was an initial kind of 6-month initial term that was being kind of batted around, for me that was not a huge negative. Likewise, there was I think a lot of hype over the Section 21 being abolished, and for me, when I was looking at the bill that was being proposed and all the additional grounds under Section 8 that they were talking about, actually, I was really positive about that as well, looking at it and saying, well, you're still going to have, if you've got a legitimate reason to evict your tenant, you're still going to be able to do so. And I think, for me, I think there was a lot of perhaps headline pleasers in the bill. And personally, I try and look at it. Every time I looked at it, I looked at it and said, okay, what can we take out of this as a positive? And as we said a second ago, mandating an ombudsman, looking at a specific court to deal with it, I think was all really positive. Probably the biggest rumble that I've had from landlords is the pets. Landlords have really or a lot of the landlords that I've been dealing with are very anti and don't feel that should be something they have to accept. And I held a landlord seminar in November last year, and we talked about everything that was in the bill and what it was looking like it was going to be. And the minute we mentioned the pets bit, the whole room was in uproar about it. So I think, if anything, that's the one that we hear the most noise about.
It has been ridiculous, that the pets issue. I mean, this has become a bit of a running joke in the NRLA. My colleagues all know how much I hate talking about this, because it's been misunderstood. I'm making up words. It's been misunderstood so much from the very outset. I mean, what the bill as did was essentially take the status quo, which is in case law, and just say we're going to make that statute. It was never suggesting that anyone would have to take a pet. It was simply saying, if your tenants would like to ask you for a pet, you've got to entertain that request. And if you want to say no, you've got to tell them why, which is exactly what the OFT case and the case law says at the moment. Yet you are absolutely right. We could be talking about the fact that the courts were taking a year to award possession, that Section 21 was gone, that there was no fixed term before we secured that amendment. But the point that landlords would come back to was, what if my tenants want a cat?
Yeah.
Have a conversation with them.
No,
Tell
I think
it might not be suitable. End of.
And I think for me, that's exactly where us as agents come in, is our job, whether it be this bill or a bill in the future, our job is to educate those landlords and guide them through this. And I'm really passionate about us not getting het up about the headlines or the things that are used to win votes, and actually look at what is proposed in the future by whichever government it is and say, right, this is what's being proposed and this is what it means to you, Mr. Landlord, in reality. And I think that's the job as me and us as agents to do.
Yeah, exactly. let's have a look. Actually, sorry, before we move on, just to explain the fixed term point, actually. So just as a quick recap here, what was being proposed in the Renters Reform Bill was that there would be an initial fixed term of 4 months before, which the tenant would have to be there for at least 4 months, and could then, after 4 months, give 2 months notice. So in effect, it was a 6 months minimum fixed term. That's the point you were alluding to earlier, I think, Ben. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Super. So just let's move on to the landlord mindset and sentiment. So we've got here one of the regular trackers that the NRLA does here, the Landlord Confidence Index, which, Chris, you can probably explain better than me, I think.
Yeah, you can probably see from that single line on there, we're not quite as cheerful as the letting agent cohort, and I think partly that's actually got less to do with what was happening with the bill and more to do with the cumulative impact of what landlords have encountered over the last 5 or 6 years. So that kind of teal line there is ticking along there at net confidence at, what are we at the moment, about 30-ish, which is not bad considering where we've been. That's taking negative confidence and positive and kind of making a net figure. What you tend to see, actually, and it'd be interesting to see, it won't work out with our field work, but what you tend to see is a real dip going into elections. Because what landlords really feel bad about or feel negatively about is uncertainty. And even if the polls were suggesting a party that they were more or less in favour of, which we know isn't necessarily the case at the moment, we tend to see a dip downwards, and then we tend to see a rebound. Because even if the party coming in, isn't to their liking, knowing what they plan to do for the next 5 years sits quite well. Because landlords are thinking about their investments, they're thinking about how long they can establish a tenancy for, they're thinking about at what point they might need to churn their portfolio, or at what point they might be ready to invest again. So that's what we tend to see. And that kind of 4 or 5 year tracker that we've got on the screen there is really reflecting the kind of certainty landlords have got in the marketplace. The thing that has meant that our confidence is down historically, because if you took this back to about 2012, 2013, you'll see we had a 60 or 70 net positivity. Things were pretty good. And it's changes to tax policy. It's the infamous Section 24 has had the biggest impact probably of anything across our sector. It's changes to stamp duty with additional levy. It's changes recently to capital gains tax, which I know have been sold as a positive, but actually in the net, when you look at the tax-free allowance for the year plus the rate, actually isn't great. And all of that stacks together to give us this relatively poor confidence looking ahead to the future. I think what's going to be really, really interesting is not just when we see what the next government wants to do about tenure, but also the point that's made and then the bullet points here, what they want to do around energy efficiency. Because I think all of the focus over the last year or so, quite rightly, has been on renters reform. Actually, the thing that might well hit landlords in their pocket the hardest is going to be energy efficiency. And we know that's where Labour, if they do come to power, want to do things quite differently and maybe a bit faster than the current government have wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Really good commentary. Thank you. So let's move on a slide. Let's look at what influences how people are expecting to vote in the UK election. We've still got a decent number of people who say they're open to changing their mind. About less than half of people have decided who they'll vote for. Some have decided but are open to changing their mind. That's around 19 to 27% of agents and landlords respectively. Almost inverse proportions on completely undecided. Only a few people being refused next, saying they're really not intending to vote at all. So still quite a lot to play for. This research was done about 3 or 4 weeks ago, so it's not since the announcement of the general election, but I think it's fair to say it's pretty fresh. Any surprises here, either of you guys, when you see these?
I don't think there's anything shocking there. I mean, I think what we do know over time, and this is from the landlord point of view, is there's a lot more going on in landlords' minds when they're deciding who to vote for than just housing. And I think we come to that a little bit later on, but actually they're a lot more reflective of the electorate, across the board. So what they think about the economy at the moment is probably having more of an impact, what they think about defence and so on and so forth. So it's not shocking what's on here.
I think for me, I think housing was always used as a kind of headline, and it's always something that it affects most people. And I think when you look at those figures as well, and you see how many people still on the fence and still willing to change, I think there is going to be a lot to be said for what is put out there and what they will do in the next government.
Yeah, and I think just it's a really good reminder actually that the landlord sector is almost 3 million people in the UK. So it's a big part of the demographic. It's big, but slightly above average. I think it's fair to say, Chris. So probably slightly more inclined to vote, and very much, however much they might get demonized by sections of the media and some politicians, they're a really important political segment, and the agents who represent them obviously very much are going to be influenced by their views too. But I think that point that you just made, Chris, around they have more issues in housing on their mind. They tend to think about issues affecting the rest of the electorate. We can see that on the next slide, which looks at which policy areas determine how they say they're going to vote. And we've got dark blue here are the agents, the teal ones are the landlords, and yeah, I think I haven't seen the latest version of this for national polling, but I very much expect these are the same issues that you'd see in a national poll. So general economic competence, the NHS, tax, immigration, house building policies, cost of living. And the big ones are pretty shared actually between the two groups, the NHS and taxation. But a couple of important differences here. General economic competence, much more of a concern for landlords than agents, and cost of living, much more of a concern for agents than landlords. It feels to me like age is one of the issues going on behind these findings. Would you guys agree?
I think it'd be fascinating if you had that demographic tracker on there as well, because I think you're absolutely right. Landlords are skewing towards older brackets, and we're seeing that come through in their views towards some of the housing policies, but also their views towards general policies on here. And equally, the fact that such a large proportion of landlords are not only a bit older, but they're holding their property as an individual. They're holding it quite often for their pension. And I think that's what's coming across particularly in the cost of living, excuse me, and their views on taxation.
And Ben, this point around general economic competence, what is that? It's probably not even quite in the top 4 issues from agents. Does that reflect the general mood, do you think, or does that surprise you?
That's fine to me, to be honest, from a personal perspective. And I think for probably people in my position and similar within the industry, I think that would probably come as a shock to them as well. But I think it again comes down to that demographic of who's responded to this, when actually, if you look at the agents, you've got everything from perhaps a trainee negotiator upwards within that demographic who will be, probably affected quite highly by cost of living, potentially. Things like NHS will be very much on their mind after the last couple of years that we've had. And they probably, if they're relatively young, early 20s, like a lot of the staff in my office are, still very much in their junior part of their career. Actually, they probably don't necessarily look at economic competence and house building policies and things at this stage. That's probably to come in their career. So whilst they shocked me when I think, as you say, when we drill down into that demographic, I think it probably explains a lot of what we're seeing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, one way to think about this is that cost of living is inflation and economic competence is interest rates, isn't it? And if you're on the earliest part of your career, then making ends meet is probably a bit harder, and cost of inflation is more of a big deal. And if you own an investment portfolio of properties, then interest rates are going to be a number one concern for you probably. And
absolutely, and you're probably looking at a slightly longer time horizon as well. So I think quite possibly, which is maybe counterintuitive when we're also talking about a much older demographic who might not be in the industry as long. But I think landlords typically, when we're talking to them about what they want from the wider economy, they're trying to plan an investment over the course of a mortgage term. So they're trying to think about 20 years. And I think you want to know there'll be stability and economic competence over that time frame, whereas then cost of living is a bit more of a snapshot. And, you're quite right. Even if you're finding it hard at the moment, if you are a landlord sitting on a portfolio, you are less likely to be directly impacted by the cut and thrust of the cost of living crisis at the moment.
Yeah. Super. So let's move on. Actually, again, drilling into a little bit the economics and tax questions in particular. You've both alluded to a couple of these points, but as we just said, general economic competence is much more of a big deal for landlords than agents. And the CGT tax changes, however much they might have been dressed up, as Chris explained, in a sort of positive way, a lot of landlords would not see it that way round. And we've got the figures from the survey here, just the landlord respondents, looking at how they answered the question around, given the changes in CGT, how likely is it they will now sell property from the portfolio? And actually, the thing to do here is to look at the top and bottom of this chart, because the 17% at the top, those guys are selling anyway. So again, don't exactly know why, but it might be reasonable to think that sort of recent policy changes are a factor in that. And the guys at the bottom here are somewhat or extremely likely to sell. That's another 16%. So you've got actually a third of the landlords here are saying that they either are selling, or it's likely or extremely likely that they will sell property from their portfolio. So that seems pretty disruptive to the sector, Chris, does it not?
It is, and it's a long-term trend as well. I think if we look back over the last, well, it's so difficult with COVID being bang in the middle, but if we look at the immediate post-COVID period and what landlords are doing, we are routinely seeing around a third of our members telling us they're selling at least a property. And I caveat that, because it's not necessarily landlords saying, I'm running for the hills, I'm selling up, I'm getting out. They're rationalizing portfolios. They're trying to reduce their gearing. They're trying to make their business sustainable. Some are leaving. That's absolutely happening, but a lot of them are just rationalizing. But it's been the common theme over the last kind of 6, 7, maybe even 8 quarters. What's worrying, I think, is we're not seeing a corresponding number of landlord buying. Now, we underrepresent a little bit because we won't see the absolute newest investors coming in and immediately joining in on NRLA polling, because they haven't had a problem yet. They haven't come looking for us. But it is a real trend, and it's being driven by lots of different things. And it's curious the way the government announced the CGT change, or curious, maybe it's clever, I don't know, to try and paint these as a positive, but actually also use it as another wedge to keep some of that property in the sector. Because it's all very well reducing the headline rate, but when you're essentially removing all of the tax-free or the exempt amount, whatever it's called in CGT, you're making it very, very difficult for landlords. Yeah. You're making it really difficult for landlords who've held that property for 15 or 20 years and have appreciated a gain to get out without handing over a significant sum, which if you've remortgaged repeatedly, you might not even have there as liquid capital in your portfolio. So it is a bit of a trap, really, for some of those landlords to hold them in there.
Yeah. And in terms of what might make a difference in favour of landlords here, I suppose the agents we would see as particularly well placed to have a view on this. They're the professionals who are dealing with this across the market. And there are 3 things that the survey draws out that agents think would help landlords: reversal of Section 24, the reintroduction of the wear and tear allowance, sort of tax depreciation issue, and the income tax thresholds, increasing those because they've been frozen now for 3 years and will be frozen for 3 more years under the current existing government policy if they come back into power. Ben, do you want to talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah. So I think they're, again, come as no surprise to me. I think actually speaking to landlords, especially the landlord that has been in the market for 20 to 30 years, they've seen this as their income. They see it as their income for their retirement. And actually now with those 3 things at the bottom, or at least the first 2, Section 24 and the wear and tear allowance, they're very much not receiving the income that they would have been previously. And I think on the front line, that's probably one of the single biggest reasons that people say to me, I want out, I want to sell. I no longer want to be a landlord, because that hit them in the pocket relatively quickly. So I think for me, that would be, if there was something to do with that area, I think that would definitely encourage landlords to stay within the market. And equally, I do think that it would also help encourage landlord buying. I believe, again, as an agent, our job, there's a lot of landlords out there that don't actively look for investment properties. But if you went to a landlord and said, look, I've got this, it gives you this yield and it's a good buy, landlords buy in that, and that's predominantly the way we see investors buying, by us going to them and saying this is a good investment. So I don't think there's the investors in the market that there were maybe 10, 15 years ago where they were actively out there looking. But if you ask landlords when with the portfolio they've got, have they actually gone out there and looked for them? A lot of them haven't. So I think if there was some change around that tax side of things, and it becoming an income rather than just a capital growth investment, I think very much we could see landlords back in the market, but more from us as agents going to them with what is a good buy and a good investment property, rather than us expecting them to come to us.
And that assistance will be really crucial, I think, because we've got to remember we've got a whole generation of investing landlords who've never experienced what I would consider normal interest rates. Yeah. We've got a whole generation of members of the NRLA who've never known interest rates above 1%.
Thought money was free
in the last couple of years, and it's a very different proposition to plan that investment and to make it work at a 7 or 8% return.
Absolutely, yeah,
to a 3 or 4%.
Yeah. Got a quick question here from Alwyn Oliver asking if there's any sign that Section 24 will be reversed. He notes that Matthew Pennycock, one of the shadow DLUC ministers, criticised it publicly a week or two back.
Glad to hear, Alwyn. Always a good question. I don't know is the short answer, because I think the government, whoever they are next time around, has got to make very difficult choices around tax, and they're going to be quite unlikely to immediately jump into what will be considered by a lot of the press as a handout to landlords. Now, I wouldn't consider that. I'd call it a completely rational reset of the tax system, but I think that's how they might look at it. But if we're looking on the bright side, we should remember it wasn't a Labour government that brought that in. I remember holding hustings around 2014 going into 2015. And actually, it was only the Conservatives in those hustings that thought this was a relevant and fair policy. So when you reset and you start with a new government, there's always a chance. I'd be surprised, but we'll certainly be pushing it.
Yeah. So we've got just 3 or 4 things to finish off on here. So first of all, this is a letting agent only question. We looked at whether there were any particular pledges that parties could make that would sway people to vote for a particular political party. Most common answer here, a third of agents said nothing would sway their vote. But the 2 most popular ones here are reinstating that Section 24 relief. We just talked a bit about that, and retaining Section 21, the right of landlords to end time for no fault. Anything striking of you guys from these findings?
For me, I think the reinstating tax, I'm not surprised at that. The retaining Section 21 still, I question why. Again, that's become such a big thing, especially with the relevant Section 8 grounds that were being talked about. But equally, I can understand the nervousness around it. So yeah, nothing massively of surprise there, to be honest. It's pretty much as I would have expected it to read.
Yeah, I mean, Section 24, I think, is always going to be the biggest point on there. Section 21, I mean, it is completely reasonable for landlords and agents to be worried, not knowing what the next government might do. I mean, I'm with you, Ben. I think where we got to with the bill as was workable. It wasn't perfect. It was going to be more difficult for other people, but it was workable. I do have a worry that if we have a change of government, if we see a fresh start, that actually we might see the removal of Section 21 and not all of those mitigations that we need. And that would worry me. And that's going to be our focus. But it's enough to sway those votes, obviously not in the majority of cases.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to jump on to the cost of living point. Again, this has come up a couple of times. It's the most important issue for agents, and it's, I suppose, especially pressing for, in general, it's an issue, I think, associated with the younger demographic, which, as Ben said, most letting agents are fairly early in their career and in their 20s, we know from previous research that only 40% of agents think they're paid fairly, and almost half of them, almost half of the ones you had even up to 4 years experience are earning less than £20,000. So definitely on the lower end of the pay scale here, and understandably, some of the inflation we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years would have been a real pressure for them. However, I think I'm going to move on from that context, and let's just look at the supply side of things. So this is, I thought, put some pictures on the one of the issues that's been a big issue for the industry for the last 2 or 3 years, which is a lack of stock. And it looks as if supply and demand are starting to level out a little bit, actually, from this survey. So what you see here is on the left-hand side, these are figures from agents, but they're talking about how many tenants, whether the number of tenants looking for properties is increasing or decreasing. And you can see generally they are seeing increasing number of tenants looking for properties, but at on a sort of lower level than we saw in the previous year's survey. So the previous year's survey is the dark blue, and the teal color survey is the most recent one. And you can see that there's fewer people saying a significant increase in tenants, and slightly more people saying a small increase in tenants. And on the flip side of it, you see the properties available to rent. So this is agents talking about, actually, sorry, I think the key is wrong on this one, because this is actually talking about the landlords, an increase in landlords offering properties to rent. Again, dark blue is last year, light blue is this year, and you can see that people are expecting, again, the same sort of shift is going on here. So it feels as if some of those pressures are abating here, does that feel right to you guys? So some of the pressures from the market in the last couple of years starting to level off?
I think so. I think demand is still very high, and I think, but I think where we've seen the switch, and we're kind of out of London, and where I've seen that switch is that the post-COVID market was very much 3 and 4 bedroom homes. You couldn't get enough of them. When they come to the market, you had 5 or 6 people fighting over them, and they went incredibly quickly for quite a high price. And the 1 and 2 bedroom flats, whilst they were still going, there's still a market for them. The demand wasn't as crazy as the 3 and 4 bedroom homes. We've seen that do a reverse, whereas the 1 and 2 bedroom flats currently are now still very much in demand. And if they come to the market, you will have 5 or 6 people that want it, and inevitably you have 5 people that are disappointed. But we are seeing that perhaps slightly higher end of the market, 3, 4, 5 bedroom homes, is definitely a little bit slower. We're still not experiencing huge void periods, but we're not having that kind of surge of activity where we've got people fighting over it, and we've got people offering over asking price. And in some instances, we are starting to see that price reductions are having to be considered at that end of the market because the initial price isn't quite working. Not all the time, but it's just starting to definitely creep in, which tells me that it is definitely cooling off to what it was a year ago. But 1 and 2 bedroom flats for us currently is still very much there. But yeah, there's definitely the foot's come off the gas a little bit.
Yeah. And how about you, Chris? What does it look like in NRLA?
I think I'd agree with all that. I'm actually quite pleased to hear there's a market back in 2 bedroom flats, because that was our worry about a year ago, actually, that there seemed to be, we were hearing from lots of our members that they were the kind of properties that they were trying to sell, and actually they were beginning to see maybe a lack of demand in the buying market there. But I think context with demand is key, though, because we're comparing this year with last year, and we have to remember quite how ridiculously high demand got last year. So to ask for the percentage change almost, is it busier now than it was at that really, really busy point last year? It's inevitable we're going to see less acceleration. But I think from our point of view, there's still an awful lot of demand out there, and crucially, there isn't that supply coming into the market to meet that demand. And that kind of builds on all the points we've made over the last half hour or so. There's just not that confidence to get out there and buy the property. If you looked at this from through the eyes of almost any other investing sector, you'd think there'd be landlords queuing up to buy properties to get into this market to meet that demand, and they just don't have the confidence for one reason or another.
Well, and as you said, they're not necessarily used to having to pay 7% interest rate in mortgage costs on it. Okay, so we're going to move now to the last couple of slides, looking at some specific other issues that we haven't touched on yet. So the first of those is short-term lets. and we asked here whether respondents thought more powers are needed to control the growth of short-term lets at a local level. We've got the chart here showing responses from agents, the dark blue, and landlords in the teal. Third of landlords say they don't know, and landlords generally less bothered about this, not but slightly more on the don't know end of things. Don't think more powers are needed to control the growth, whereas agents are looking definitely more concerned about this. 25% of them saying they definitely think more powers are needed, and over a third of them saying possibly. What's the concern here, Ben? Why do you think agents are more askance on short-term lets?
I think it would be interesting on this graph would be to see whereabouts the agents that have said yes, definitely, are actually located as well. Because for me, where we are, it's not something that's overly coming to a major concern for us, purely because it's not something that we've seen our landlords doing very much. But I can imagine if you're down on the south coast, that it might be something a lot more in the forefront of your mind. So I suppose for me, I think yes, it is a concern, potential concern that short-term lets become a more profitable way of doing rentals, and therefore we see more landlords with buy-to-lets going that route. But at the same time, I think I think it will be something in a change of government that will probably be discussed and talked about, because I think there needs to be a drive for housing. There needs to be a drive to get more landlords and more available property. And I think probably this potentially is somewhere that they can look at to make a quick fix potentially. Whether or not they do or not, obviously, is yet to be seen. But I think it is probably an area that could be looked at quite quickly and potentially help fix a problem. But yeah, and area-wise, it's really dependent on where you're located, I think, as to what response you'll get on this question.
Fair enough. And Chris, of course, your members all over the country. Is that reflected in how you see it? Is it particular regions where this issue is most prevalent?
It is. I think the landlords who are answering yes, definitely, are almost certainly going to be in very high demand areas on the south coast, in the southwest, certain parts of London, where we're seeing a different kind of short let spring up. I think not necessarily all holiday lets, but different kinds of business models. I think most landlords, though, they probably fall into two categories. They kind of think, well, if I've got a void, it's quite nice to know that I could instigate a quick short let and prevent that impact on my income. But also they're a bit insular. They've probably only got a couple of properties. They're not thinking about the wider market, and therefore they're not particularly bothered, and they fall into that third. I think you've got a lot of landlords out there, though, that are looking at this and saying, well, I understand why the government want to stop the drain of property into the short-term let market, but actually they're going about it all wrong. Let's not make them suffer the same way they've made us suffer. Let's actually make investing in residential property more appealing. Let's reverse Section 24. The reason, my landlord friends are thinking about short-term lets now is because of the tax changes. Let's address the problem in our market rather than make their market more hostile. And I think that's what they'd like to see, frankly, those who are thinking about it.
Super, thank you. And then final slide before we turn over to questions is, but there's quite a bit on this slide actually. It's some of the other takeaways in the report. And this chart, which is now looking at letting agents only, is looking at 4 specific things and asking for each of them, what will be the impact of this policy on your lettings business? Teal is good, red is harmful. So for example, on scrapping selective licensing, 43% of letting agents think that would be beneficial, only 7% think that would be harmful. But when you look at the dreaded rent controls, 55% of agents think that would be introducing them would be harmful. 16% only think they would be beneficial. And you've got a majority of people, the wrong way of putting it. You've got 2-to-1 against requiring a minimum EPC rating for lettings or increasing local licensing. So a bit of a difference between increased local licensing and the selective licensing, which is, in many ways, I think is the same issue, but people perceiving it slightly differently here. And it was phrased slightly differently in the survey. But Ben, do you want to kick off here? What's the in a nutshell, why are rent controls so harmful?
I think the fear of rent controls is that landlords will exit the market, and I think for a letting agent, that's their biggest concern, is that if we get rent controls introduced, it's a less favourable option for a landlord, and they will ultimately look to sell. The same with the energy performance side of things. A lot of landlords are really worried about that minimum energy rating coming in at a C, because I think a lot of landlords see that as there's a huge investment they need to put in to be able to then continue letting the property. So I think for a letting agent, I think those two are probably the two that we hear our landlords talking to us about the most, and as to why they would consider leaving the industry. My response to that really would be, if we go back to the tenant fee ban, we're 5 years out the other end of that now, and at the time it was a disaster. Everyone was up in arms about it. How are we as letting agents? What's the impact on our businesses going to be? And no doubt, them letting businesses did get hugely impacted by that. But I think it's a case of kind of looking at how do we mitigate that risk now? How do we start looking at our properties and start trying to get them, where possible, up in their energy rating? And with regards to rent controls, I think it's just now, whilst the market's still positive, is trying to increase our rents in line with market value as much as possible. There's a lot of landlords out there that don't increase their rent on a yearly basis. We've got quite a few, but even if it's just small increments in an upward direction, so that you haven't got this situation where you've got the market rent of 1,500 and the current tenant's paying 700. I think there's steps that we can make now as letting agents to try and mitigate the impact on these relevant changes to our business if we start thinking about them now.
Yeah. And Chris, what do you make of this? Obviously, I mean, not all of your agents use letting agents, but would this be reflective of landlords as a whole, do you think?
I think they would. I mean, between about 50 and 60% of our members use an agent for one purpose or another, maybe not their whole entire portfolio. But I think the rent control debate is perverse, because it simply doesn't work. You can look at practically any example of rent control over the last 50 years. You can look at the various times it's been introduced in England and Wales, and it leads to perverse outcomes. It doesn't bring down rents. And the crucial point is, it's all very well saying you're going to cap what I can charge. If nothing's being done about what it costs to provide that good quality accommodation, then of course I'm going to make a loss. I'm a private business and I'm going to exit the market, exactly as Ben says. So, it's a very, very strange policy to be talking about at a time when you're trying to control those costs and you're trying to bring rents down. You've only got to look at Scotland, who've been experimenting with this the last few years. You've seen, exodus might be too strong, but you've seen a very steady stream of landlords leaving the market in Scotland. You've actually seen higher rent inflation in Scotland between tenancies than anywhere else in the UK over that period. And you've seen landlords having an arbitrary cap not based on their costs. So it's just such a damaging policy. And hopefully whoever comes in sticks to all of the commitments at the moment, not to look at rent control, but we shall have to see. The other point on that chart, I suppose I would pull out, is once again EPCs, because it is the other point that is going to hit landlords' pockets. I think licensing tends to aggravate you if you're in an area, and I'm in the middle of applying for a renewal on a selective license myself at the moment, so I can completely understand that 7% who feel it's very harmful, because it's an annoying process. But the point that I think has the potential to really disrupt the market is EPCs. We've got about a third of our stock currently at about a D. And a lot of that will take an awful lot of investment to get to a C. And we're talking tens of thousands of pounds. And that can work absolutely fine.
Per property.
Absolutely, per property.
Yeah.
And that may be doable if you have a £750,000 home in the southeast that requires solid wall insulation at 20k. If you take that same property and you drop it in Burnley, and that property's worth £70,000, those numbers don't stack up. So there's a huge challenge there, I think, to work out what we're going to do with this aging stock and how we can keep it in circulation and improve conditions, because we do want to see efficiency improved, but it's got to be a way to do it without driving lots and lots of landlords into the red.
Yeah. There's a American journalist who I must admit I don't know much about, but called H.L. Mencken. But he's got this great quote, which is that for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And I'm pretty much sure he was talking about rent controls myself. But let's open the floor here. We've got a few questions on the Q&A. A couple of them have been answered already. And this is a recorded webinar, so anybody who wants to go back and listen to it again, you'll have that ability. Just make sure that you're on our mailing list. You'll get access to the webinar to replay at your leisure. But we've got a couple of questions which I think worth drilling into here. A couple around Section 21, and I think it's just the question really here is, what's the future of this, given that we may have a change of government? The polls are suggesting we will have a change of government. What are the other parties' views on it? I mentioned earlier there is cross-party support for it, but I think just any more colour we can offer there around no-fault eviction. What is it? Is it ever going to become law?
I mean, I think at the moment, if there's one thing there's political consensus about, it's ending no-fault evictions. It probably means ending fixed terms, although there are other ways you could go about doing this. We don't know what the Conservative Party might do. I mean, there is a chance that they will change their view on this, having gone through all of the battles they have internally. But looking at the polls, that's probably a bit of a moot point, and we've got to look at how Labour would do this. I think the concern that I would kind of flag for people is speed, because the balance we had in the bill that's just fallen is, you know, a fairly, leisurely is the wrong word, but a fairly planned out transition process from the current programme to the new system. I have a suspicion that if we do have a Labour Party led government, if they do have quite a sizable majority as is predicted, they could try to move very quickly on Section 21 and then consult on all of the other measures, the positives that Ben mentioned earlier, you know, the Ombudsman and the Register and things like that. So we could see quite a short, sharp shock to the system as Section 21 goes, and then a wider reform later down the line. And I think that's something we've got to be very on guard to, because it could be damaging. You know, we need mitigation if we're going to lose that. We can operate without Section 21, but we need the right grounds to be introduced. And I'm not sure there's the consensus that all of that's necessary. All that's necessary in all parties at the moment.
Yeah. And final question. Would a change of government affect the number of landlords selling up?
I think everything affects the numbers of landlords selling up at the moment. So, you know, it could be good, bad, or indifferent. I think what we shouldn't do, though, is overinvest in the politics. I think if you stripped away all of the factors as to why landlords are selling at the moment, you'll see two driving factors. One of them we've touched on a lot, and it's the finances. You know, the model of investing in the PRS over the last 20 years has been very cheap finance, very cheap credit. And that's not there at the moment. And we're seeing lots of landlords not really making the numbers stack up. The other half is demographics. You know, we have got an aging landlord population, and we've got a generation coming up who may have looked to inherit that property, who aren't very interested, don't really want the hassle. And if you can get a return of 5% in an ISA, why am I going to stick that money into a property and potentially have arrears and voids and EPC issues and licenses and everything else that I might have to contend with that could, frankly, see me in front of a judge for making a very, very minor mistake? So I think we're going to see a lot of retiring landlords. We're going to see a lot of intergenerational shift in those assets, and, you know, possibly a generation that don't really want the hassle.
Super. Well, on that note, I'm going to call time. I'm going to thank you both. It's been really, really good to have you both join us here. If anybody wants to follow up more on this, we've got probably most notable is our Agent's Guide to Lettings and the Law, which if you scan this QR code, you'll get a link directly to it. But keep an eye on Goodlord's newsagent for further webinars, further courses. Quite a few of them are CPD accredited, so help you with your professional development. But Ben, Chris, many thanks for your time. And I know you will, like I will be watching the next 6 weeks avidly, and I look forward to seeing what it offers for our sector. Thank you once again.